In a world obsessed with noise, fame, and perfection, one man chose silence, a quiet rebel who never begged for attention, yet captured the world with a whisper. Frank Ocean didn't shout his truth. He sang it, through pain, longing, and the kind of honesty that cuts deeper than any spotlight could ever reach. His voice wasn't built for the radio. It was built for the soul. He turned heartbreak into poetry, identity into revolution, and solitude into a symphony. From writing songs for others in the shadows, to crafting albums that redefined what music could mean, Frank Ocean became the rarest kind of star, the one who disappears, yet never fades. But behind every haunting lyric and every mysterious silence lies a story of storms, of loss, rebellion, and the courage to start again. This is not just the story of a musician. It's the story of a man who taught the world that love has no rules, art has no labels, and truth doesn't need a stage. Before the Grammys, before the world even knew his name, there was a boy growing up in New Orleans, a place where music doesn't just play, it breathes. Frank Ocean was born Christopher Edwin Breaux in Long Beach, California, but it was the streets of New Orleans that raised him. His childhood was steeped in the hum of jazz clubs, gospel choirs, and the rhythm of everyday struggle. His mother, Katonya, was his foundation, strong, grounded, and fiercely protective. She believed her son had something rare, a heart too big for the world. His father, however, was a shadow, a presence marked more by absence than guidance. Frank would later describe his early years as a search for love in a place where it was often silent. Money was scarce, but imagination was not. While other kids chased noise, he collected sounds, old records, snippets of radio melodies, the echo of passing trains. Music became his refuge, his secret language. Then, in 2005, everything changed. Hurricane Katrina tore through his city, washing away homes, memories, and dreams. The storm didn't just destroy, it displaced. Frank lost his studio, his community, his roots. But sometimes, disaster forces destiny. He packed his life into a car and drove to Los Angeles, chasing nothing but a dream and a belief that music could rebuild what the storm had taken. In the silence after the chaos, a new voice began to form, fragile yet determined, soft yet unbreakable. It was the beginning of Frank Ocean, the artist who would later turn pain into poetry, and loss into legacy. Los Angeles was never kind to dreamers, but Frank arrived with nothing to lose, and a voice too unique to ignore. In those early days, he slept in cheap apartments, recorded in borrowed studios, and wrote for whoever would listen. While the city glittered around him, he stayed in the shadows, the nameless writer behind other people's hits. His pen became his currency. He wrote for Brandy, Justin Bieber, John Legend, and Beyoncé, pouring raw emotion into songs that others would sing. The irony wasn't lost on him. The world was hearing his words, but not his voice. Then came a turning point. Through a chance encounter, Frank crossed paths with Tyler, the Creator, and joined the hip-hop collective Odd Future, a group of rebels redefining what youth, art, and authenticity could mean. They didn't just welcome him, they challenged him. They gave him the freedom to be strange, to be soulful, to be himself. In 2011, out of pure frustration with the industry, Frank leaked his own mixtape online. Nostalgia, Ultra. No label, no marketing, no permission. Just music, and the world listened. It wasn't loud, it was honest. Tracks like Swim Good and Novocaine didn't sound like anything else on the radio. They sounded like heartbreak caught between memory and dream. Critics called it a revelation. Fans called it salvation. Suddenly, the ghostwriter had become the ghost the industry couldn't ignore. Frank Ocean, once an invisible hand, was now a name whispered across studios, playlists, and forums around the world. But with recognition came pressure. And with success came the test of staying true in a world built on pretending. When Nostalgia Ultra went viral, Frank Ocean stopped being a secret. He became a statement. The industry didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't chasing fame, fashion, or formulas. He was chasing feeling. And in 2012, that feeling erupted into his debut studio album, Channel Orange. It was unlike anything the world had heard. Lush, cinematic, filled with strange chords, spoken word, and stories that blurred love, identity and faith, thinking about you, bad religion, pyramids. Each track felt like a confession whispered into the dark. But the true shock came before the album even dropped. In a quiet letter posted online, Frank wrote about falling in love with a man, the first love of his life. No press release, no announcement. Just honesty. In an industry obsessed with image and masculinity, that single act changed everything. It was brave. It was human. It was frank. When Channel Orange finally released, it didn't just top charts. It broke boundaries. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece. Fans heard their own hidden truths in his words. At the 2013 Grammy Awards, Frank Ocean stood on stage, shy, still, and glowing under the lights, performing Forrest Gump. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about truth. He won Best Urban Contemporary Album and became a voice for a generation that didn't fit in boxes. Jay-Z, Kanye West, and Beyoncé called him a visionary. The New York Times called him the most important artist of the decade. But fame, for Frank, was never a finish line. It was a mirror, and as his reflection grew clearer, so did the cracks. Behind the artistry and applause, pressure was building. The industry wanted more albums, more hits, more of him. But Frank Ocean never belonged to the machine. He belonged to the silence, to the spaces between notes, where emotion lives. The world had found him, and soon he would find a way to disappear again. Fame had finally caught up to him. But instead of celebrating, Frank Ocean began to vanish. After Channel Orange, the world waited for his next move. And waited. And waited. Months turned into years. No interviews, no concerts, no explanations, just silence. Behind that silence, however, was chaos. Frank was locked in a tense battle with his record label Def Jam. They wanted hits, schedules, deliverables. Frank wanted freedom, integrity, time. Rumors swirled. Was he retiring? Was he lost? Had success broken him? In truth, he was plotting something only he could imagine: an escape. In 2016, he released Endless, an avant-garde visual album streamed exclusively on Apple Music. A single, continuous video of Frank building a staircase, soundtracked by haunting music. It felt more like a farewell than a return. Fans were confused. Critics were stunned. And then, 24 hours later, he dropped Blonde. Independent. Unannounced. Untamed. A move so bold it outsmarted the entire music industry. Fulfilling his contract with Endless, then walking away free. Some called it genius. Others called it betrayal. Frank called it art, but even freedom carries a cost. He withdrew from public life almost entirely. No tours, no press, no appearances. People began to romanticize his absence. Frank Ocean had become the myth he never wanted to be. Then came heartbreak beyond music. In 2020, tragedy struck. His younger brother Ryan was killed in a car accident. The loss shattered him. His rare glimpses online were filled with grief, not melody. The boy who once rebuilt his life after a hurricane was now standing in the ruins of his own heart. And yet, even in silence, you could still feel him. Somehow, Frank's quiet spoke louder than fame ever could. When Blonde arrived, it didn't explode. It unfolded. Softly, slowly, like a dream whispered between heartbreak and healing. There were no music videos, no press tours, no late-night talk shows, just a single voice, drenched in nostalgia and honesty. Frank Ocean didn't need a campaign. He was the message. Blonde wasn't built for radio. It was built for reflection. It stripped away everything artificial, leaving only feeling. No hooks, no formula, no compromises. Just vulnerability, unguarded, unapologetic, unforgettable. Songs like Ivy, Nikes, and self-control turned pain into art. They weren't written to entertain. They were meant to understand. It was the sound of a man rebuilding himself from pieces that no one else could see. Critics called Blonde a masterpiece. Fans called it a mirror. For Frank, it was neither. It was therapy. In a time when artists chased relevance, he chose absence. When others shouted for attention, he whispered. And somehow the world leaned closer to listen. He stopped being just a musician. He became an idea, a symbol of creative freedom, a reminder that art doesn't need validation, only truth. After Blonde, Frank began to explore even further. DJ sets, fashion collaborations, his own radio show, Blonded. He blurred the line between music, philosophy, and visual art. Each appearance felt like a rare glimpse into a mind that refused to be defined. He had reinvented fame by walking away from it, proving that the loudest statement is often made in silence. Frank Ocean didn't return to the world stage to reclaim a throne. He came back to remind us that art is not about perfection. It's about presence, even in absence. And through Blonde, he found redemption not by erasing his pain, but by transforming it into something eternal. Frank Ocean didn't just make music. He changed what music meant. His art redefined R&B, dissolving its borders and rebuilding it from fragments of soul, indie, jazz, and electronic whispers. He gave the genre something it rarely had before: quiet, space, vulnerability. For a generation of artists, he became both compass and permission slip. Billie Eilish learned intimacy from him. The Weeknd borrowed his atmosphere. Steve Lacy, Daniel Caesar, SZA, and countless others cite him as a guiding light, proof that emotion, not ego, is the truest sound. But Frank's influence stretched far beyond melody. When he opened up about love and identity, he shattered barriers that once silenced countless others. He didn't preach acceptance, he embodied it. To the LGBTQ+ community, he became a mirror reflecting dignity, tenderness, and courage. In fashion and visual culture, his fingerprints are everywhere. In the minimalism of Boys Don't Cry, the vulnerability of his photography, the fluidity of his aesthetic. He taught artists that mystery could coexist with meaning, and that disappearing can sometimes say more than being seen. Awards faded. Trends shifted. Yet Frank Ocean's legacy only deepened, not as a pop star, but as a poet who used silence as sound. He didn't chase the spotlight. He changed where the light fell. As the world kept spinning faster, Frank Ocean learned to slow down. Fame had once been a storm. Now he lived like the calm that follows it. He built a quiet life, surrounded not by cameras, but by creation. A private studio, a small circle of friends, and a space to breathe. He became more selective, not just with what he released, but with what he let in. Through years of silence, he began to see art differently, not as something to prove, but something to feel. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried weight. Fame, he once said, is just noise. The truth is in the silence. He explored new passions: photography, design, architecture, anything that let him shape the world quietly. He invested in freedom rather than fortune. He found meaning not in applause, but in authenticity. Loss had softened him, not broken him. Pain became presence. Loneliness became clarity. For Frank, personal growth wasn't about reinventing himself again. It was about finally being himself, fully, freely, fearlessly. He learned that healing doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it's just peace. In a culture that demands constant visibility, Frank Ocean chose the opposite: to live, to feel, and to let his art speak when words could not. And in doing so, he became what every artist secretly longs to be: untouchable, yet deeply human. Some artists leave behind noise. Frank Ocean left behind echoes. Echoes of honesty, love, and quiet rebellion, drifting through time, long after the last note fades. He never begged to be understood. He simply told the truth, and let it find those who were ready to listen. In a world obsessed with speed, he moved slowly. In a culture built on image, he stayed invisible. And somehow that made his presence unforgettable. Frank Ocean taught us that greatness isn't always loud, that the most powerful art often comes from the spaces between words, and that to be human is to feel deeply, even when it hurts. His story isn't about fame or fortune. It's about freedom, the courage to walk away, to build, to love, to lose, and to still believe in beauty. He once said, "Work hard in silence. Let success make the noise." And maybe that's what he's been doing all along, because even when he disappears, the world keeps listening. This was the journey of Frank Ocean, a man who turned silence into sound, and sound into truth.